Good morning, folks. So today, seeing as you are writing your math Olympiad, I thought we had better not lose another lesson, seeing as we're rather far behind. Instead, I'll make a little video for you. Hopefully I'll keep this short. Alright, so because this is a video, obviously, you could watch the whole thing through, but I highly recommend that you stop it. In fact, if you didn't stop the video when I asked you to stop it, I think you'd probably be losing out on a lot. Ultimately, reading poetry is really, and studying literature in general, is about your own response and coming up with your own ideas. So when I say that you should stop it and give it a think, I really do hope that you do so. Right, so the poem that we're looking at right today is The Lost Woman by Patricia Beer. And obviously, with any text, especially any poem, we want to start with the title. So you'll notice that we have just 3 words here. And I'm already going to ask you to stop the video right now and define what the classes of each of these words. So what word class is the word the? What word class is the word lost? And which word class is the word woman? Okay, you can pause the video now and just write that down. Okay, so the is obviously a definite article, you should have got that. Lost is an adjective, which could also be a verb in the past tense. In this case, it is used as an adjective, so we can call it a gerund. I'll write that word here for you briefly. Gerund, because it is a word that is not a fixed class word, i.e. it can be used as both a verb and an adjective. And then we have woman, which is obviously a noun, singular noun. Okay. Right, so the question is, what do these things do? Why do we choose the article the rather than a, or just no article at all? Why don't we just say lost woman? Why do we say woman specifically? And why do we choose the adjective lost to describe woman? What do we think the poem is going to be about as we read this title? What are our associations with the word lost? What does it make us think of? What does the word woman make us think of? Okay, so jot down your associations with each of these words quickly, and what you think, what sort of an effect you think each one creates. Pause the video now. All right, so you should have come up with something along the lines of a definite article talks about one single woman. It could also be a woman in general, the concept of a lost woman. So not just a woman, but a concept. The idea of a lost woman. So not a particular person. So if I said, for example, the government, I might not mean the specific government, but the concept of government, the government of countries, the act of governing, etc. So the lost woman could refer to perhaps a stereotype. The definite article the, because it's a definite article, you might have realized that it shows that it accepts that the audience knows who the lost woman is. If I said a lost woman, I would be accepting that the audience, or assuming that the audience does not know this particular lost woman. It's the same as if I said a school. I work at a school. I expect my audience not to know which school I work at. If I said I was working at the school today, then I expect you to know which school I was working at, don't I? Right, so the implication is that the reader already knows this lost woman. And just a quick preview of the rest of the poem, we've got my mother seems to be the subject of the poem, although the lost woman is the subject in the title. So if my mother is the lost woman, how is the audience supposed to know the speaker's mother? That sounds very strange, doesn't it? The next thing you might have noticed is that this woman is not given a name. She's simply identified as the lost woman. So if you had to identify your friend as the lost friend, the lost boy, the lost girl, rather than calling their name, that would possibly suggest that you're sort of stigmatizing them in a way, because you're limiting their identity down to the fact that they're lost. What matters to you apparently is this defining adjective. So an adjective plus a noun that merely indicates gender is very limiting, isn't it? It doesn't suggest very much humanity. It's very objective, very neutral. We might also have particular stereotypes or associations with the word woman. So students often say things like nurturing, caring, mother, wife, etc. These are, of course, are gender stereotypes, but it's very important to note that this woman is not identified as a mother. It's not the lost mother. It's not the lost wife. It's none of those things. She's a lost woman, indicating that her identity, she has an identity apart from her roles or her jobs, and perhaps that's merely what she is, a woman. Some people also say strength, which I think is a good comment for from a feminist perspective. A strong woman, a character who is fully grown, an adult. Grown is another word. Fully grown, there are adult there, mature, etc. So this is not a girl. She's fully grown, and yet she's lost. And then you might have noticed the ambiguity of the word lost. Does it mean that somebody has lost her, i.e. misplaced her? Do we mean misplaced, or do we perhaps mean something different? Do we mean that she herself is lost, that she doesn't know where she is? Do we mean that that she's literally lost, that she can't find her way to wherever she's going? Or do we mean that she's figuratively lost, that she is perhaps emotionally lost? Somebody said mentally lost. That sounds like they're insane. I'm not sure that's a very good comment, but maybe. There are certain elements here which do suggest a little bit of cognitive dissonance, perhaps, in the poem. But I think that would be a bit of a stretch to say that she's insane. And who is the woman? We don't really know who this woman is, except for the fact that she's lost. I mean, it seems perhaps maybe her identity is lost. Maybe. Have we lost her permanently? Is she perhaps figuratively lost in the sense that she died? All of these are very interesting things that go through our minds when we read the title, if we give it a bit of thought, which you should be doing. Okay, so our expectations of a woman may not be what exactly what we see in this poem. There are also other literary associations with the word woman. In classical literature, and poetry in particular, a woman would be the woman would usually be the muse or the inspiration. So if we leave out the lost, the woman in the sonnet, for example, would typically be an ideal, beautiful character who the sonnet writer or the speaker can never hope to be with, and there's a sense of unrequited love. He tries really hard, but he never succeeds, and so forth. So when we have a lost woman, perhaps there's a sense of losing the muse, losing the ability to, the inspiration for writing, or something along those lines. So if we look at it from a literary perspective, there's a whole new range of meanings that we can dig up from that. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of the poem structurally, and I'd like you to pause your video again and make notes on the structure. What features do you see? Simply describe the structure of the poem as you see it here on the page. Just pause your video now. Okay, so you might have noticed that we have 6 stanzas. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stanzas, and they each have 6 lines in them. The lines are relatively equal in length, so it seems fairly consistent. So we have a fairly regular structure, and we have a relatively regular rhyme scheme as well, as at least in the beginning. Warning, morning, pain, and lane, and then we have a break here, white and gate, which is something worth noting. Anytime you ever see a departure from a standard rhyme scheme, especially if there's an established pattern, then it's worth noting. In the next stanza, we have saw, began, tree, and down. No rhyme, right? Approach and clutch. Almost a rhyme, but not quite. Years, marriage, wars. Years and wars, again, almost a rhyme, but not quite. Marriage, village. That's fairly rhymish. Extramural, school. Almost a rhyme, but not quite. We can actually call this technique para-rhyme or half-rhyme. These are, used for a particular reason. We can get into that a little bit more in a second, but that's a good thing to note. Time, acquired, and home. Again, you don't see any rhyme. Grow and know, we have a rhyme. Acquired and desired, we have a rhyme, more or less. Habit and night and rabbit. We've got habit, rabbit, night, but night doesn't rhyme with hate. We've got did and we've got chide, but they don't rhyme either. One's got a long I sound and the other one's got a short I sound. Did, I'd. It doesn't quite work, does it? Snaps, me, perhaps. We've got snaps and perhaps and me and ghost and lost. Again, it's not quite rhymed. Why do we do this? Give it a think. Okay. We'll come back to that. Then you might notice that there's a relative lack of punctuation in the beginning. We have only full stops. We've got one there, another one here. We've got a full stop in the middle of this line here in the second stanza. Why would we have a long pause in the middle of the line? Why would we break the line like that? And then we've got full stops at the end of these 3 lines. Again, why would we do that? These are all fairly long sentences, and this is a very short sentence. Why would we do that? I made a life for her over the years. Again, another very short sentence followed by a longer sentence. Why? And an even longer sentence. Okay, in this stanza, we have only one sentence the entire way through with a couple of commas. Again, only one comma in the middle of a line. We call this, when we have a pause in the middle of a line, we call that caesura. You should know that by now. I'll just write it here so that in case you don't know the spelling. Caesura, oopsie, sorry. Caesura is the plural, and caesura is the singular. Okay. Again, we have another short sentence. She is nearly always benign, full stop. Her habit is not to stride at the dead of night, full stop. We have a hyphenated word, but the hyphenated word is split. Usually when you hyphenate a word, you keep them on the same line. And why did we split it this time? Very strange, particularly as there is more than enough space in this area to write that. There is no, it doesn't seem necessary. So clearly, in terms of keeping it regular. So why did we do that? Other than, of course, to rhyme rabbit and habit. Hear how they hate themselves for losing her as he did. So we've got lots of these stops, long pauses in the middle of sentences, long pauses. Think about what they do for the poem. Remember, long pauses always slow things down. And again, another short sentence. We have a lot of these very short sentences tacked on, it seems, almost tacked on, at the end of stanzas. Okay, and it even ends, the poem ends on that final note, I am not lost, and yet it is a lost woman. Oh dear. Okay, so we should probably read through the poem now at this point. Then we need to think about the structure. Remember that if we have 6 lines of 6 stanzas, that's pretty regular, right? And the rhyme is also fairly regular. And when we think about regularity in poetry, it should have a specific purpose. So we like a sense of order. Regularity creates a sense of order, control, structure, and we like order. We like control and structure. It helps us make some sense of the world. Um, we like to force difficult concepts into orderly boxes because it helps us deal with those difficult concepts. So, for example, processing grief. Um, if I was writing a poem for a funeral, perhaps I might want a very structured form, and I want it to be regular, so that I don't perhaps mispronounce things due to my grief. I don't want my voice to waver or something like that. I'd want to, when I write an essay, I want my paragraphs to be structured so that I can break down a complex concept into its smaller parts and make sense of it. That's what we try to do when we write essays, is try to make sense of very difficult or complex concepts in literature or in any other field where we write essays. It's always the same idea. So in the AS poetry pack, we consider a poem which is almost a sonnet but not quite. It was written at a time when sonnets were very popular, and it's about a man who loses his daughter. It's called On My First Daughter by Ben Jonson. And it seems like a sonnet, but it's not complete. It's missing something. So it follows this very rigid rhyme scheme. In the end, it's actually couplets, not typical sonnet quatrains. But it seems like it's quatrains, and it looks like a sonnet in the beginning. But it's so emotional because he's lost his first daughter. She's died at the age of 6 months. And because it's so emotional, he tries to force it into that. But the emotion seems to escape at the end. Although he's trying to control it and trying to sort of gain control of himself, it seems to lose control at the end when we seem to be missing 2 lines. We're missing a conclusion to the whole piece. A sonnet typically has a 2-line conclusion at the end, so 3 quatrains and then a couplet for English sonnets. So in total 14 lines, and his poem only has 12. It also is short a couple of syllables. So instead of having lines of 5 foot in a line, 5 iambic feet, it only has 4 iambic feet. So we're cut short 2 syllables at the end of each line, and we're short 2 lines at the end of the whole poem, which seems like it mimics the cutting short of the whole life of the child, it's very effective and very powerful and moving. And I think we have possibly a similar idea here. So it doesn't seem like we're structuring an argument, because it's not a very argumentative style of writing. In some of your other poems, for example, Lover's Infiniteness, you see a much more argumentative style, and there the structure really does contribute to the argument. But here I would argue that the regularity is more about processing and making sense of the world after the loss of a mother. And let's read through the poem now and get a sense of what's happening. So my mother went with no more warning than a bright voice and a bad pain. Home from school on a June morning, and where the brook goes under the lane, I saw the back of a shocking white ambulance drawing away from the gate. She never returned, and I never saw her buried. So a romance began. The ivy mother turned into a tree that still hops away like a rainbow down the avenue as I approach. My tendrils are the ones that clutch. I made a life for her over the years. Frustrated no more by a dull marriage, she ran a canteen through several wars. The wit of a cliché-ridden village, she met her match in an extramural class at the OU summer school. Many a hero in his time, and every poet, has acquired a lost woman to haunt the home, to be compensated and desired, who will not alter, who will not grow. A corpse they need never get to know. She is nearly always benign. Her habit is not to stride at dead of night. Soft and crepuscular in rabbit light she comes out. Hear how they hate themselves for losing her as they did. Her country is bland, and she does not chide. But my lost woman evermore snaps from somewhere else. You did not love me. I sacrificed too much, perhaps. I showed you the way to rise above me, and you took it. You are the ghost with the bat voice, my dear. I am not lost. Right, so you can re-listen to that section of the video as many times as you want to try and sort of listen to the tone of everything. And you could reread it in a different voice if you really wanted to. The key thing that I tried to do here is to pause where the pauses were, so that you could hear the pauses a little bit more. Right, so in short, we have a speaker here who's lost their mother. My mother went, and we, we know that she's passed on because we see this, shocking white ambulance drawing away from the gate, and she never returns. And I never saw her buried. Okay, so we know that the mother has passed on, and we know that this is not the end of the story. If it was really about her passing on, that would be the end of the poem. But we know that it's actually about life after loss, and that's obviously a key theme in the poem. So how we deal with loss, how we deal with grief, etc. And something that you might want to look up is the stages of grief. There are obviously different psychological theories, but you could Google the 5 stages of grief, and you should have all sorts of interesting reading about how people process loss. This is just good information in general, and it might help us understand the poem a little bit more. But I'm not going to get into that. So let's take a look at how the author presents these sort of tones and feelings in the poem. First of all, it's a very personal poem, as we have the personal pronoun my. It's always something you want to identify. If we have personal pronouns, we most certainly whoops, what's going on with my mouse? We most certainly want to comment on them. Okay, so my mother, somewhat autobiographical in nature, and in fact this was I think published many years after she actually wrote it, so we know that it was quite an emotional poem for the author herself. Well, I think that's a fair thing to say. Usually we would talk about the speaker, and I still encourage you to talk about the speaker in the poem here, rather than to talk about the author's own feelings. But it's still all right. The poetic voice is what we want to focus on, even though we know that the mother is, that the speaker is really based on the author's experience. Okay, so my mother went. I like this verb here because it's really very childish, and it's very, very subtle. It doesn't say she died. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that she is, deceased in other ways in any way. It simply says that she left. She's gone. And so we focus on the going, and it's very abstract. No more warning than a bright voice and a bad pain. Let's make this red. Bright voice and a bad pain. So it's her passing, her departure from the speaker's life is depicted as something that had no warning. No more warning than somebody speaking clearly, or say a headache. And maybe there's this suggestion of maybe she shouted or out briefly before she passed, or maybe this is what warned the family that before they called the ambulance, for example. But this is all that the speaker remembers as a child, and we know that she's a child because she's home from school. And I think that that's particularly emphatic. I think this is very poignant because the grief is experienced by a very young child. She is home on a June morning. June in the Northern Hemisphere is summertime, obviously. And typically people have school holidays in summer. So she is at home, and it's a nice day, a June morning, summertime, probably outside. She's outside where the brook goes under the lane. This is a very pleasant image, isn't it? Home from school, June morning. These are very positive lines. The lane, you might imagine a tree-lined road with a small stream going under a bridge, perhaps. All very peaceful and idyllic. You can call this pastoral imagery. And then we have a very highly contrasting image in the very next line. I saw the back of a shocking white ambulance. This really stands out very powerfully. Um, Even if you left out the word shocking, the word white has such a strong contrast to the brook and the lane, which is I suppose a dark color, very woody sort of connotations to that word. Woody in the sense of trees, of course, not in the sense of Monty Python's woody words. Anyway, okay, so I saw the back of a shocking white ambulance drawing away from the gate. And of course, an ambulance really doesn't fit, and that's horrible. Nobody likes to see ambulances; they're never very positive. Uh, but the next thing I want to look at here, apart from the contrast, which is obviously something you want to think about in terms of a child's understanding of the world, they are shocked. It's traumatic, but it's traumatic in a very subtle way. The same way this bright voice and bad pain are sort of incipient. They kind of sneak in. It's a sneaky trauma, not a trauma of seeing somebody being run over, for example, or something that's extremely traumatic like that. This is perhaps a shock that is subtle and doesn't, suggest that it really needs to be dealt with. And I think this is part of the problem. As we see, it seems that there's a difficulty in dealing with this loss as the poem runs on. What I want to look at next is this verb drawing. Drawing is a word that we don't associate with vehicles, at least not motor vehicles. Drawing away is not, drawing the car certainly doesn't fit, does it? Where we would use drawing typically would probably be when we're talking about curtains, drawing blinds, drawing curtains, and drawing a blinds has a particular symbolism or connotation to it, because people typically, at least in England, Europe, Western culture, draw the blinds when somebody passes away, and then they might hold a wake, which is a sort of a funeral ceremony, not quite a funeral ceremony, but people stay awake and sort of mourn the loss of the person who passed. And I think using this word here is a great example of foreshadowing, because late in the very next line, we see that she never returned, and in the following line, she was buried. So foreshadowing that death, and it's a very subtle way of doing it. Another thing I think that you should note is that it was drawing away from the gate. It seems like the experience, the final experience of her mother is the back of an ambulance moving away from her, and it seems that she actually missed the passing. And, you might, as a child, definitely feel guilty for not being there when the mother passed, being outside perhaps where the brook goes under the lane. Maybe she was there when the mother passed away, or fell, or hurt herself, or however she went. But it seems like what she remembers is the mother leaving without her. The mother left. She never saw her again. All that she remembers, the final memory, is the back of an ambulance driving away. I think that's very sad, and that sort of encourages us perhaps to not really accept the death, and especially this here. She never returned, and I never saw her buried. I never saw her buried, so how do I know that it actually happened? She never returned. Okay, she's gone. She went, but I don't know that she died. And these verbs all seem to hide the fact that she actually has passed away. And so this romance began. And the word romance is a nice word because in literature, romance is associated with sort of fairy tale type stories where imagination is key. In romantic poetry, remember that imagination is very important, and it doesn't have to mirror reality. It can be, there's a lot of Greek mythological references, and there's a lot of sublime imagery and so on, which transports your mind. So we don't really need to accept reality necessarily. And romantic poetry was, in fact, a rejection of the reality of their time. They did not. They sort of revolted against the romantic poets. Revolted against industrialization. They didn't like the fact that all these factories were polluting up London. William Blake, in particular, found London a disgusting place. And his poem London is well worth reading if you want to know a bit more about romanticism and what the industrial era looked like. Take a read through that poem. So they preferred to imagine a natural world where everything went back to being sort of much more pastoral. Oops, sorry. And in fact, I think you could call this imagery here quite pastoral. The brook and the lane in the June morning, and so forth. So a romance began, and this, it has obviously the connotations of a relationship between two characters, obviously between the speaker and the mother, who is now described as an ivy mother, which is also quite a particularly interesting image and hyphenated word. Why would we associate the word ivy with the word mother? Give that a quick think. Pause your video, please. And, well, sorry, hold on. Before you pause your video, think about ivy and mother. Also think about the ivy mother turning into a tree. Think about the ivy mother hopping away. And think about it being like a rainbow. Just pause that video for a second and think about the effects. Please write them down. So you might have come up with something along the lines of the ivy mother, the blending of ivy, of the notion of ivy, of plant matter, natural imagery, with the idea of the mother in the child's mind. You might have, of course, come up with something completely different. And if you did come up with something completely different, please, leave me a comment, give me some feedback. What are your ideas? What's your response? There are, of course, many other ideas. But I think the idea of blending images, the final image of the mother and the final image of the lane and the natural environment, sort of blending together. The ivy mother then becoming a tree and hopping away. Hopping is a very rabbity sort of image, isn't it? And later on we see more rabbit imagery, rabbit type language. Away like a rainbow down the avenue. And I think this simile, like a rainbow down the avenue, is a particularly nice one, as every child knows, is fascinated with rainbows, and learns at some point that you can never reach the rainbow. As much as you want to chase it, you'll never reach it. In fact, there's even songs that reference chasing rainbows as an idea of, as a metaphor for futility, or doing things that are pointless or meaningless, because as much as you try to approach it, you never can. So we have the sense of the speaker trying to hold on to the image of the mother, or the memory of the mother, perhaps. And it seems initially that ivy is a very clingy substance. Plant that sticks its roots in everywhere, and it's actually ultimately destructive. Although it might look nice, on a wall, eventually it will destroy the wall. I think all of those connotations associated with the mother suggest perhaps that the mother is the idea of the mother is something that sticks with her, and digs its roots into every part of her life, perhaps, and eventually grows into something that really, is very solid, yet still, is very elusive. Very solid, very permanent. It seems almost everlasting, and yet it's still intangible, like a rainbow. Intangible means that you can't touch it, in case you didn't know. Right, as I approach. So then my tendrils are the ones that clutch is an interesting sentence that doesn't have any link. You'll notice that there is no linking word, no discourse marker, nothing to connect it to the previous sentence. Like so, for example, and she, which connects it to the previous paragraph, stanza, sorry. So when I say my tendrils are the ones that clutch, it doesn't have any connection, right? And I think it's this sense of separation, which is very important. A lack of connection here is actually emphasizes the fact that it's so out of reach. The concept of the mother, the memory of the mother herself. And we also have a sense of the Ivy mother, is the mother Ivy, or is she the mother of Ivy? Because here we have tendrils, which are the roots of ivy. Well, they're not exactly the roots of ivy. The bits of ivy that ivy sticks into the wall to kind of grab on. And the speaker is saying that she has the tendrils. So it seems like she, in fact, is the ivy, not the mother. So maybe they're both ivy. Maybe the initial understanding of the mother was that she was the one clinging on, like perhaps a ghost haunting her. But actually, it's the speaker clinging to the memory of the mother. They are the ones that clutch, that hold on. And clutch is a very strong verb here, a very good verb. Just like the verb drawing and returning, I think that this is and hops. The verb clutch is very good because it highlights the sense of desperation. There are connotations, of course, of clutching at straws, holding on tightly, grabbing quickly, trying to just grab anything that's in reach, because things are obviously fading as rainbows fade, memories perhaps of the mother. Right, sorry, this is taking much longer than I thought. I'm going to try and hurry it up. So I made a life for over the years. This also doesn't really follow very well, but perhaps this is an example of clutching, of holding on to the mother who is gone. So she makes a life for her. Of course, you can't make a life for somebody else, can you? You can't really make a life at all, unless you're, Dr. Frankenstein. So she makes a life for her over the years. She slowly creates this persona. This her is not the mother, not the actual mother, but the Ivy mother. Yeah. The imagined mother. Frustrated no more by a dull marriage, she ran a canteen through several wars. These are just examples now, of course, of the life that she created. Running canteens through several wars. Oops, sorry, I don't have dates there. She would have expected her mother to have lived through the war. Well, of course, her mother did live through the wars, but maybe she did run a canteen, maybe she didn't. But that's completely immaterial. This is what she imagined of the mother she no longer has. She doesn't really know about her life, so she creates one in her mind. Frustrated no more by a dull marriage, so she obviously creates a world in which the mother is no longer married. She could create whatever she wants. She perceives the marriage as dull, so she writes out marriage from her life. And then again, we see the strength of the woman, perhaps. She's not just working in a canteen, but running a canteen. She's free of any duties, perhaps marital duties and whatever. She's a solid character. She creates this strong character for her mother. Maybe a better character than her mother actually was. We don't really know. The wit of a cliche-ridden village. Okay, all these positive things, of course. She is the one that stands out, the positive, and amongst the negative. Cliche-ridden village. Ridden is quite a powerful word. Sounds like they're, full of fleas or something. Cliches being compared to some sort of pest. She and you know, she stands out as being somebody who's witty, who is not cliche. She met her match at an extramural class at the OU summer school, the Open University, and this is possibly based on the speaker's own life, and it's you know, somewhat comical and ironic. You know, imagining her mother in her position at extramural classes at the Open University. Um, um, there's a strong sense of pathos here, of sympathy for this. I think we can identify with this, imagining that the person who is no longer with us is with us now as we go through our lives, and imagining what they would do if they were in our position. This is something that people frequently do, perhaps as they're dealing with grief, but in a way it's also, there's a suggestion that this is not very good, as remember that ivy is something that is also destructive. So, although it might be nice to add all of this to life, to sort of decorate our perception of the world with, you know, ideas about what somebody else would have done, somebody who has passed away. It's ultimately destructive, and we're not living our own lives. We're hanging on to somebody else's person. Many, and now we have another stanza, and these stanzas don't really follow on very well, do they? There's no real conjunctions, there's no real links between them. Many a hero really does not follow. There's no semantic link, there's no connection in terms of meaning between heroes and the Open University Summer School, is there? Oh, not really. Okay, so we have the sense of separation, of maybe false divisions, trying to break things up to put things in boxes when the concept is actually much more difficult to deal with than we expected. But also it might be, you know, we might consider that these stanzas are stages in her process of dealing with grief or dealing with loss. And maybe as she grows older, as she goes through the Open University, things change. You know, as a child, this is how she sees her, very childlike, dreamlike images, very imaginative. Then we create still very imaginative, creating a life for the mother. And finally, perhaps writing about the mother. You know, many hero in his time, and every poet, and now we're coming back to the idea of the definite article in the title, that every poet has acquired a lost woman, so there are many of them. And this is not capitalized or anything, it's you know, just the concept of a lost woman or a muse to haunt the home. So every poet, she says, in a somewhat ironic voice, I suppose, has this muse, a lost woman, to haunt the home, to be compensated, to be paid for their services, perhaps. What service might they be providing? Give that a think. Pause for a second and think about how they may be compensated and what they may be compensated for, why they may be desired. Okay, so you might have come up with some ideas along the lines of compensation, being paid in perhaps words or flattery, maybe, for the or thoughts, even for the inspiration that they give the poet to write. They are serving the poet by providing a source of inspiration, like Petrarch. He wrote 300 sonnets about somebody called Lara, who may or may not have even existed. A lost woman, a woman that he could never have. If she did exist, she was married. So he was kind of shut out, and he moaned about his terrible fate in 300 sonnets. So, which made him very, very famous. People liked his sonnets. They really delved into the essence of what grief was and what loss was, and they told us a whole lot about human nature. So definitely he owed that woman, his lost woman, something. He had a great debt to Lara. um, and desired. Somebody to be always desired, but never actually caught, like a rainbow. Yep. Something that we can paint in pictures, but never actually have. Who will not alter, they will never change, they will never grow. Isn't that convenient? To have a source of inspiration that will not alter, will not grow. They're always consistent. We can use them for our own ends because we don't have to work very hard figuring this person out every time. We they're a consistent lover, the ideal that we wish we had. You might have heard of loving someone rather than loving the person themselves, loving the idea of being in love, etc. You might have heard of those things spoken before. It is a very sort of somewhat immature kind of idea, but it's sure, it's a fact of life, an experience we all deal with, I suppose. Who will not grow? A corpse they need never get to know. And now, we've been so, touchy, so figurative the whole way through, and now a corpse is so literal and so brutal. It's really shocking, isn't it, to refer to your mother who's passed away as a corpse. It's very brutal in comparison to the rest, isn't it? So maybe as the speaker grows older, changes, maybe we're coming to the terms with the fact that this has really happened, that this person really is now nothing more than a corpse. It was very brutal and very sort of in your face, and they need never get to know this corpse. And in a way, it's kind of bitter. I think the tone here. We don't need to get to know this person. It's just somebody who floats along through history, and we don't have to engage with them. We can just use them for our own ends, to motivate our heroic deeds, to write our poetry or our stories, to inspire our lives, etc. And they won't alter, they will not grow, they will not change. There are, some people use these as moral compasses. For example, your grandfather says that, drafts is the greatest game in the entire world. And you capitalize on that because they will never change their opinion. The grandfather who has passed away who believes that drafts or checkers is the greatest game in the world will never change their mind, will they? You need never get to know any more about them. We will just take what they say because they are simply constant. And we'll get a lot of mileage out of that. My grandfather said drafts was the best game in the entire world. He was good at drafts. He knew what he was talking about, and other logical fallacies. So we base a lot of what we believe about the world based on this, on people who've passed away and who've left us. But we never really get to know them because there is nothing more to know. Well, that's a bit of a problem. That's the end of our lesson. I'll try and complete this for you. Let's just make 2 more comments before I disappear. She is nearly always benign implies that she is also not always benign. She is nearly always benign. Sometimes she is not. Sometimes she is harsh. But most of the time she's fairly nice. It doesn't hurt. Her rabbit, and note that this goes back to the she, which we referred to back here, but also perhaps here, the corpse. The corpse is usually benign. Her habit is not to stride at the dead of night. She's not, a ghost. She's not gothic. She's soft and crepuscular. In rabbit light she comes out. Crepuscular is the time in the morning and in the evening. Certain creatures like rabbits and foxes, foxes, they're not diurnal. They don't come out in the day, or nocturnal in the night. They're crepuscular, so mornings and evenings. She comes out. Very, very soft, very gentle, rabbits and so forth, not harmful like ghosts, not dead. Hear how they hate themselves, Now we're going back to the idea of the people. They hate themselves for losing her because she's benign, she's calm, she's such a perfect person, as they did. Her country is bland and she does not chide. So, the whole tone of this section is very bland, isn't it? There are no strong adjectives or adverbs anywhere. And she doesn't complain. She doesn't moan at them for doing things poorly, for losing them. They moan at themselves. They hate themselves. So the problem is not the ghost. The problem is the people left behind, isn't it? And so it's really not about the ghosts, about the lost woman. It's about the people who are dealing with the loss of the woman. And here we get the final concluding stanza. But, contrast, here is our conclusion. We know it's the conclusion because it's introduced with a contrasting conjunction. My lost woman, as opposed to everyone else's, my lost woman evermore snaps, always violent to me, from somewhere else, somewhere I can't find it, it's hidden. You did not love me, I sacrificed too much perhaps, I showed you the way to rise above me. So it's very accusatory. You did not love me. Oh, you're a bad example of all of this. You did not love me. I sacrificed too much, perhaps. I showed you the way to rise above me, and you took it. You are the ghost with a bad voice, my dear. I am not lost. So we see that the person, the woman, the lost woman, seems to be the speaker herself, and not the ghost, who snaps at her and says, I'm not lost. I'm not the one who's got the problems. You are the one who struggles to let go, etc. Okay. Although it does say that that there's of course the old interpretation that goes completely the other way. You took it. You did rise above me. So there are different interpretations. Give me your thoughts, please. I would like to know, especially what you think about these last 3 lines. And if you have any ideas, leave me a comment. Thanks, guys.